that we do and everything that we do is that we connect with Him. Now that's the number one thing, that we obviously, that under connecting with Him, we have to first connect within. But if renewing our relationship with God is number one, then we can't love them if we don't first love Him. And we also can't love Him if we don't love them. And so today we want to kind of share with you several points that are going to kind of talk about how do we renew our relationships. Whether we're married, single, widow, we all have people in our life that we're engaged with. God never created us to live on an island all by ourselves. He wanted us and created us to live in a relationship. And so today, allow me for a few moments to kind of set this introduction for you, that all of us, when you actually do me a favor, look at the people that are right next to you. That's a little bit uncomfortable for some of us to do. But when you look at that person, look at what they're wearing, how they're styling their hair, let me tell you what kind of shoes they're wearing, what kind of clothes they're wearing. I mean, you may not ever you may not ever talk about doing this, but we all do this. I mean, we all look at people. So you look at people, and we're all different in our own different ways. We style our hair different. We have different things that we like and dislike. And so me and Roxanne are going to be a little bit vulnerable with you guys a little bit, all right? Let's show you how we are different. So Roxanne likes to talk when she gets home from work, and I like to be quiet. Okay? They say that during the day, men speak about 30,000 words in one day, and women speak about 50,000 words in one day. I like to do those 30,000 when I'm at work, and Roxanne likes to do them when she gets home. So we have those differences. Roxanne, God lover, as we do that in the South, we always preface the statement with always a God lover kind of stuff. Roxanne is one of the neatest people you'll ever meet. She likes things to be nice and tidy. I'm one of those people that I like, when I have a glass of water, I might put it on that counter and I may not pick it up for a while. Or if I go into a cabinet, I might open the drawer or open the door and not close the cabinet. You all know people like that. You know, it's not just me, I hope. Roxanne is one of those people that she loves, she loves romantic comedy movies, and I'm more of the action-packed movies. We are different. And every one of us in our relationships with our sisters, brothers, parents, children, friends, we're all different. And as we journey in our life, for many of us, sometimes those differences can be magnified. So much so that sometimes, instead of us connecting with those people that are in our life, that God's put across our path, sometimes we can be conflicting with them. Let me show you how. So if our minds or if our bodies are like a computer, okay? If our minds are like a computer, every day we have choices to make. We talked about mindfulness in the first session. But if we make choices, we have a choice of either, I believe, downloading two different types of software on our computer of our mind. One of those softwares can be my way software. That it's my way. I want exactly my way or the highway. This is what I feel, and because I feel it, it must be right. Or this is what I want to see get done, and if it doesn't get done, I'm not happy with that. Or we can download God's way software. Or we say, you know what? Let me give that person the benefit of the doubt. She may have forgotten to send me a thank you card or call me when I was sick, but it's okay. Maybe something was going on. I'm going to forgive that person. I'm not going to judge that person. And every day, we have the choice of which type of software we download. And we have to recognize that just like a computer, if we download the wrong software, can freeze up our computers. Sometimes if we download my way software, it can freeze up our relationships. And many people today are traveling through life in relationships in which they're kind of in but not truly connected with. Sometimes that's in a spouse relationship. Sometimes it's in a relationship with a child or a child to a parent. Sometimes it's with siblings. Sometimes because we're downloading that wrong type of software, we can get off course. And so today we have 3 main points in this whole second part of this session about renewing our relationship with others, with them, is 3 points that we want to kind of get across for you. And the first is, how do we fight nicely? Because we can all, how many of you never had a fight in your life? Because Orthodox people, we can fight. We're passionate people. How do we fight nicely, love offensively, and seek God collectively? 3 points that we're going to cover. I'm going to let Roxanne start the first one with fighting nicely.
So 1 Peter 4:8, it says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Notice it says keep. It's something we have to continually renew and replenish every single day. I'm going to read you a little bit. It's a very short letter that a wife wrote her husband. It was words she was putting into, to counsel him. I said, why don't you put it in a letter and send it to him? And it said, when I am quiet, don't take it personally. Hold me, hug me, sit close to me, and be kind to me. Trust me, it will replenish me. When I am irritable, find a way to help me, even though I haven't asked. It's not that I'm trying to be vague, it's just I haven't yet realized that I can't do everything. When I am complaining about something, please don't try to fix it. Just listen and try to understand me, what I feel, what I'm experiencing, and who I am. When you ask me what I need, trust that I may not always truly know. And when you choose to love me in this way and to remain loving through my toughest moments, choosing not to judge, not to be offended, not to take it personally, I will come out and you will be the one thing I want to be near. And I would add to that and say that not only is that the one person she would want to be near, but Christ would be living in that relationship. That is how we keep loving one another earnestly. Because you see, I don't think of love as a fleeting feeling that I just hope to always have. I think about it as a feeling that I am choosing to create and recreate every single day. And every new moment is another opportunity for me to keep loving earnestly. Because it's easy when everyone's great, we're in great moods, and we're at our best. It's easy to say, I love my spouse. But when I'm complaining, when I'm irritable, when I'm tired, when I'm negative, I'm sure you would say it's not easy to love me in those moments. So one of the things that we're going to talk about fighting nicely, and these two words being in the same sentence don't really go together, right? How do you fight nicely? Okay? We're going to talk about the skills of doing that because we have to keep our faith in the fights. Okay? And so we go to Sunday sermons and we hear, we're supposed to forgive, we're supposed to be respectful, we're supposed to choose humility over righteousness, we're supposed to be merciful. But what happens when what I believe is what I believe and I'm right and you're wrong and I'm mad? I find that all those aspirational principles kind of go out the window. So the first step in fighting nicely is listening well. There's always a reason, I think, why God gave us 2 ears, but only 1 mouth. Okay, we have got to practice listening. And it is so hard to listen when somebody's coming to you and saying something that you don't really like, or that might be hurting your feelings. But trust me, underneath every complaint is really just a need that person has that they're trying to present to you. They're trying to make a request. They just may not know how. So if you listen with the intent of trying to understand, hey, what's beneath this for you? What do you want? That's how the relationship wins. You see, because I'm not listening to try to figure out who's right and who's wrong, or why what you're asking for isn't right, or the way that you're feeling is wrong. I'm listening to understand who you are underneath that anger. What does that say about you? What does that tell me about what you need? What does that tell me about something you might value? Doesn't mean I agree. It just means I understand you more because I listened. And maybe it's something I can come to work on or value more or connect to. At least I might be able to understand how you felt the way you did. Okay? So listening well isn't about trying to agree or trying to establish right from wrong. It's just trying to understand who your partner is underneath that complaint. And conflict really serves marriages and all relationships well if we can listen enough to understand who that person was because of it. Okay? Because they're asking for something, and conflict is supposed to help us grow deeper, to understand each other on a deeper level, to be able to meet each other's needs better. I'm supposed to learn something about you when you come to me with what you're upset about. If I haven't learned something new about you, then I didn't do conflict right. I was stuck in my own head about how I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm just done listening. Okay, and it's a struggle. So I say it with humility that listening is the first step in conflict. Okay? When we're listening, what we're trying to do, like I said, is trying to understand, but we're also trying to communicate some level of understanding, trying to take some ownership for what's wrong. So if I come home and I'm on the phone and I don't even acknowledge my spouse and I walk through the door and I'm chattering away, and then later on he says to me, gosh, you've been on the phone all day. My first step was, well, no, I wasn't. I want to defend myself. I want to immediately enter establishing who's right and who's wrong and why what you're saying is not correct. But if I listen, for what's that deeper request that my spouse might be trying to make?
He wanted to talk to you.
He wanted to talk to me. Okay? So if I can listen for that, the relationship wins. Oh, you want me to be present when I walk through the door. I can see how you'd feel that way. I'm not admitting that I'm a bad person or that I'm wrong and he's right. I'm just seeing how he could feel that way. So I'm taking a level of ownership, but it's not about right and wrong. It's about understanding and searching for what's beneath the complaint. What are they looking for? And when you find it, it's like gold, because the relationship will always win. So when we're trying to listen and when we're trying to take some ownership and really understand and look for that need, I will say that it is hard to do when someone comes at you with an attacking kind of demeanor. They're loud, they're angry, they're blaming, they're criticizing. What happens inside of us when that comes at us? Defensive, right? The best way to know if you're coming across well is the reaction of the person you're speaking to. They kind of take a step back, they start defending themselves, they get all loud and angry. I might not have been gentle enough, okay? So what I would say is, if you're angry, when you're angry, use mindfulness to know, what do I want? Because if I remember that under every complaint is really just a request, before I come to you with what's wrong, before I come to you describing what you did wrong, I'm going to come to you with what I want to see happen. Okay? So figure out your request before you ever even start talking about it. And you know, if you're irritated and you start talking about why you're angry, if you don't know why you're angry, you're not ready to start talking. You may not even know what your request is. So think about it and be mindful. What do I hope to see happen? Because if I can't extract a request, I might just be looking to criticize. I might be just complaining about who you are. And that never served anybody well. It doesn't make you feel good. Okay, so I encourage you to be gentle and to think about what you want before you come to conflict in order to fight nicely. And you're always trying to describe you, not them. Okay? So instead of you came home on the phone, and I'm so tired of you always being on the phone, it's I want to connect to you. I want your full attention. It's so important to me that when you walk through those doors, you give me a hug. It's I, instead of you, you. How about, this is one I hear often, you never help out in the house. You never do anything to help me. Well, when are you going to get back? Yes, I do. You're going to get lots of defense. How about, I could really use your help. I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's always a request underneath the complaint. And when you find it, it makes the conflict go that much smoother. Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about not reacting and trying to act?
So to build on what Roxanne is saying, and let me tell you, what we're sharing is not just limited to a spousal relationship. All of you, maybe you're even in conflict right now. Maybe you have a disagreement with your daughter-in-law or your son-in-law or your sister or your brother, or this is relationships in general. So if number one is listening well, and I would add to what Roxanne was saying, that what I've learned a lot to do is, when I'm in an argument with Roxanne, I just don't talk. I just keep my mouth quiet. But what I do is I oftentimes use this phrase, I need this. Like, thinking about truly, what is it that I'm needing? You know, Roxanne, I need a word of encouragement. I need this, I need that. Never be afraid to be vulnerable in a relationship where you can say, I just need this. So number two, if listening well is number one, I would say number two is don't react, act. In the field of psychology, as well as obviously in counseling, there are some amazing people that you should just know about. They're not necessarily Christian people, but there are people that are out, there are professionals within their field, and one of them is a guy named Dr. John Gottman. And he runs numerous marriage and really relationship seminars all over the world. We went to several of his. He says that we win or lose a conversation in the first 60 seconds of a conversation. We win or lose in the first 60 seconds. And so often when we enter into those conversations, we're so much more reactionary than we are just simply acting. So when I say don't react, act, this is what I want you to kind of have, is some pre-fight plan. All right? So you know that you're going to have arguments. Every one of us have arguments. They don't have to be large, they could be small, but we all at times have arguments. But you have a certain level of ground rules that you have. Ground rules for your children, ground rules for your siblings, ground rules for your relationship with your parents, and so forth and so on. In our home, we have a pre-fight plan, and I would encourage you all, whether or not you're a widow, you're married for years and years, I would create a pre-fight plan that you have that becomes part of who you are and how you are in that relationship. Here is Roxanne and Nick's pre-fight plan. They are the nevers. We never throw out the divorce word. And how often that happens in relationships. Never say the D word. Okay? We never, and this is not always, when we first got married, I will be honest with you, some of those differences, I'll be quite honest with you, we've talked about this in sermons before. I grew up where I had this belief that everybody's watching the priest. And if the priest does anything or his family does something that's off the track, oh my gosh. And I took over a parish 10 years ago that was going through a major transition. It was definitely a very difficult time in our church, huge problems that we were facing. And so I thought that the best way to be would be that we had to just show that we were as best as we were perfect in every way. And it used to cause conflict with her because Roxanne would come to church sometimes around, 10 o'clock-ish, and our liturgy would start at 10 o'clock sharp, and I'd be like, Roxanne, or we had an event to go to, and being on time would be a major issue for us. And I'll be honest with you, I believe in being prompt, but it doesn't need to come at the cost of my relationship. But early on, I thought that it needed to be that way. Or I remember early on, we were going through major problems in our community. I was trying to heal the community, and as we were growing our community and going through this, as we were seeing people growing in our community and growing the numbers of people joining our church, I look back and I can remember this so vividly, and I was thinking, wow, we're celebrating, we're doing all this stuff, we've gone through all this difficult yuckiness, and I looked back and where's my family? Like they weren't around because I hadn't brought them with me. And so there's just differences in the way in which I approach, and it caused it caused conflict that I had to recognize. So don't react, act means that we have some certain pre-fight plans of the nevers. You never use the divorce word. You never cuss at the person. You never raise your voice. Let me tell you, sometimes we think we have this default saying that says, well, that's just who I am. You know, I'm a Greek person. This is how we communicate. And let me just tell you that this study, and I'm not saying Greek, it could be Russian, it could be Syrian, it could be whatever it is, but we could just insert the culture into the sentence. But the reality is that that might be who you are, but that's not who God created you to be. And study after study shows that raising your voice loud like this, all you hear is volume. You don't hear substance. The most ideal way to communicate, actually, is like this. So if you're wanting to get your point across, it's not through yelling. So Dr. John Gottman talks about, in one of his areas, he talks about the 22-minute rule. And this is something I wanted to really emphasize to you. In an argument, what happens in our bodies, physiologically speaking, is that we, when we get angry, oftentimes we experience what is called flooding. And flooding is when there is an enormous amount of blood that is literally flooding your brain. Now, if your brain is your ability to comprehend, to understand, to make rational and irrational statements, and if the frontal part of your brain, there's other parts that do this, but if the frontal part of your brain really is in charge of making rational or irrational thoughts, when you are angry, the moment you start getting angry, the amount of blood flowing from your heart to your mind grows exponentially to a very fast rate, to the point where there's more blood than your ability to brain to comprehend. So how does that kind of how does that relate into a real life situation? Is that when you're in an argument, you will end up saying things you wish you didn't say, doing things you wish you wouldn't have done. In fact, afterwards you'll say, gosh, I can't believe I just did that. I wasn't thinking. And the reality is that you really weren't, because the amount of blood going to your brain was overwhelming that brain to the point where your heart races and everything else. And so what I would say is the 22-minute rule is that the moment that you're getting angry with someone, you take a 22-minute break. Because that's what physiologically what has shown in some studies is that it takes 22 minutes being totally separated from that person. Like I said, this could be a sibling, it could be a spouse, it could be a child, but whatever it is, it takes 22 minutes for your brain to go back to your heart, for it to go back to at a level of rest that it was prior to that argument. 22 minutes. So when you're getting angry, remember the 22-minute rule. And more importantly with that is you have to recognize that our words have power. Many of you may not remember an argument that you had, but you can remember the words that were said to you in that argument. And because of that, it's better to take that 22-minute rule. And when you're in that 22-minute rule, one thing that we do, and I'll be quite honest with you, in our house, it is go take a walk, we come back in 22 minutes. And if when you come back, the argument is still going on, another 22-minute break. And you keep doing this. Now the idea, and I will, with this is, the caveat was this is, because some people will say, well, you know, Father, we just have to keep talking it through. We just got to we just keep hammering it out. And I just will tell you that may work for you, but there are easier ways. Or some people will say, well, you know, we need to take a time, take a break until we're able to come back. But science and psychology as well has shown that, and even the Bible speaks about this, it says, never let the sun set with an argument. You don't want to take longer than an hour to come back. Because after an hour of you taking a break, it turns into resentment. Oh, you want to be that way? I can be that way too. I'll take my hour break. We'll talk when we got some time. You know, and it's that kind of, and we just keep lifting and we keep moving the net over there. So don't react, act, having a pre-fight plan and remembering the 22-minute rule. And I know, Roxanne, you want to kind of add some other things that we work on.
So that space is really important. What are we doing in that space? You know, it's so much about guarding. The Bible talks about guarding our hearts. Guarding our hearts. When we're mindful enough to realize that we are losing control, and how do I know that? Because my internal dialogue about you has shifted from problem solving to criticizing. I'm now thinking about every negative feature that I think about you. I'm forgetting all the things that I used to love about you. You can monitor in your dialogue when that starts to shift. You know you're in a bad place and space is needed because you won't be able to arrive where you want to arrive, which is helping the relationship win. We're not looking for my win or his win. What do we want to win? We want the relationship to win, okay? So that space is incredibly necessary for our frontal lobe to start firing again. Because it is not firing. There's no firing going on in the place that is God-given to us to solve problems. So in that space, you are guarding your hearts. We're not thinking about everything that you said that I don't like. I'm thinking about, what do I need? Why did this upset me to begin with? And is there a solution that works for both of us? Because ultimately what we're looking for at the end of any conflict is, again, I don't want to win and I don't want him to win. I want our relationship to win, which means I have to find what works for both of us. I oftentimes tell the kids when they're bickering back and forth, turn to each other and find a solution that works for both of you. Because if I win but I crush your needs, I lost. I lost. And vice versa. If he wins by squashing my dreams and my feelings and my soul, he's lost me. And ultimately our relationship fails. So again, that's what that space is about. I know a lot of people who take that space and they're just playing it over and over again in their mind, getting more and more angry, and then they come back actually with a vengeance. I'm like, I don't think we use the space right. Let's try to rework how we're using that space. So guard, as the Bible says, your minds and your hearts during that time, and let Christ be leading you in looking for your needs, looking for why you're upset, and trying to look for that solution. We're looking for a solution where we both win, okay? And one of the things I'd say, there are, the reason John Gottman could predict with 96% accuracy who was going to divorce and who was going to have a saved marriage in the first 2 minutes of a conversation. 96% accuracy. He actually had what he called a love lab, and he conducted 40 years of research on marital couples. He just asked them to come in his lab and be themselves, do their thing. Whether it was just living or fighting, whether they were accepting bids for attention from one another, he just observed for 40 years. So his wisdom is research-based, and he was able to, at the end of that 40 years, again, predict who would survive and who would fail. And four of the, what I would say, 4 points that I want you all to take notes on to remember, these were the red flags that he said. In the first 2 minutes of a conversation, he could tell who was going to divorce if he saw these 4 things. One was criticism. Okay, there's a difference between making a complaint or a request and criticizing someone's character. Okay? One says, I need help. The other says, you're lazy. Okay? One says, you don't do enough to help with the kids. You're just an awful dad. And the other says, hey, I'd love it if you'd play basketball with them a little more. Okay, complaints versus criticism. If there was criticism, that was a predictor. 2, and this usually followed the criticism, is defensiveness. These 2 always go hand in hand. When someone's criticized, the first instinct we have is what? Fight or flight. I'm either going to fight you back and defend, or I'm going to run the other way and ignore you for the next month and hold resentment about it. Okay? Avoiders are not better than reactors. It's the same thing. It's trouble coping with an emotion. Okay, so defensiveness is number 2. We're supposed to do what? Take ownership. Find something you can understand about your partner's perspective. Doesn't mean I agree with it. It just means I can kind of understand how you felt that way. And it's okay to say that. I can understand how you would have arrived at feeling that way. I think I could have done things a little differently. You're probably right. Okay? Notice I'm not taking full ownership. I'm trying to find something I can own so I'm not defending myself. And that's incredibly hard to do. That takes prayers and seeking God during these missions. I one time had a patient who said, you know what? They'd been married for 40 years, and I said, what's your nugget of wisdom? and they were having a 40-year wedding anniversary, and he said, you know what? Before every fight, before every tough conversation I was about to have, I grabbed her hand and I said, let's pray together. Let's pray that this conversation's going to go well. They're holding hands. They're asking for God to intervene. That puts us in the right perspective, doesn't it? And we're touching the person that we're about to have this tough conversation with. It's a lot harder to start criticizing someone that you're holding their hand. It becomes a lot harder when I've asked and invited Christ into that conversation to then spew with anger. It's much harder to do. So I think there's wisdom in that. Number 3, and this was the single most strong predictor of a failed relationship, and that is contempt. Making somebody feel beneath you. And this is well-intentioned individuals. People don't go out, wake up saying, I'm going to be an awful individual today. It's just that people have strong emotions and they don't know how to work through them. So it can come out as contempt, as attacking somebody, name-calling, bullying. There are just certain things, aggressive behavior, condescension, manipulation. Contempt is the single most number 1 predictor of a failed relationship, and it's tough to come back from. It's tough to come back from, and it's hard to be healthy within that. And last but not least, and he called it stonewalling. So just imagine, what does a stone do? It sits there, and it completely shuts off. There's no emotion, there's no feeling. So when you're talking to me, I'm going, yep, I'm not listening. I'm not looking for trying to figure out what you need. I'm just solidly angry, and I don't like you, and I'm shutting off, shutting down. And I caution you, if someone's shutting down, to just make sure I'm not attacking, because there is a reason why we shut down. When we are flooded, like I said, people either fight back or they flee, they run the other way. When somebody shuts down in front of you in the middle of a conversation and stops responding, a lot of times what they're having is an emotional reaction. They're flooded with fear internally and don't know how to react to you. And so if you notice somebody shutting down, try to take a step back and really reassess, how am I doing with communicating? Am I attacking? Am I criticizing? Okay, am I coming at this person really hard? So these are the 4, and he called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. But they're the 4 things you just want to make sure are not entering your fighting, because then it won't be nice. And remember, if conflict is done well, we grow in our relationships. I had a couple the other day come in to see me after 40 years of marriage and say, we want a divorce. I said, well, can we talk about it? Let's talk about it. They said, well, we haven't had a fight in 40 years. 40 years, they had never had a fight. I thought, we were arguing in the first 2 weeks about leaving that cup on the counter. Right? But fighting helps us grow, right? And it's not our differences that prevent us from having a healthy relationship, because men and women are quite different. Certain women and women are different. Individuals are quite different based on our upbringing, our family of origin, our personality. Personality is a huge facet of marriages that cannot be changed. Listen, let me tell you, if you're trying to change someone's personality, you will fail. There are many aspects. He's never going to make me be okay with that cup on the counter. It's like in my wiring. I'm always going to get to church at like 10:05, or 10:15. There's just certain parts of my character. I'm a big planner. I have to plan everything for a month in advance. There are certain facets of me, there's certain facets of, we can't change that's how God designed me. And I think, you know what? God wanted me that way for a reason. Those parts of me, I have to find a way to make them work in my relationship. And he has to find a way to work. We have to kind of accept influence from each other, but your wiring is hard wiring. You cannot change people's personality. So what we ultimately want to do in conflict is just better understand each other and try to accept that influence from one another while trying to seek what I always call, and this is a big thing I talk to all of my clients about, is trying to seek your best self. Trying to seek your best self. And I always tell people, if you're thinking about divorce, you can't go there until you know, with all honesty, that you have been your best self in this marriage. Because we don't know what the relationship is capable of until you've both done that. And it starts with one person trying. It starts with one person aiming for that. And I hear a lot of times people saying, well, I'm not going to do that because he blah, 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 blah. Okay. Well, you know what? I don't want my changes to be contingent upon where my husband's at. I want it to be contingent, like I said in the earlier presentation, on my relationship with Christ. Because that's ultimately who I'm answering to at the end of the day. Was I my best self in conflict? Was I my best self when I went on that run and I was trying to let go and take space? Or was I just fueling my negativity? Because we don't know what the relationship's capable of until we try that. And sometimes with criticism, we're supposed to turn it into a constructive complaint, but the truth of the matter is, you have to ask yourself, does it really need to be said? I know husbands and wives who just say everything. Like, did it really need to be? Did you really need to say that one additional, that was like the 11th complaint you had in the 11th hour, and sometimes people just need encouragement. They need a kind word. They need you to overlook some of those things you are about to complain about. Right? So I think in choosing to be our best selves, we are overlooking some of those things. We are asking ourselves, does it need to be said? Is there an actual request I can make from this, or am I just complaining about who somebody is? And choosing to remember people's goodness amidst their flaws. I think when somebody is upset at something, the benefit of the doubt, as you talked about, is incredibly protective in getting angry and entering what Gottman refers to as a negative sentiment override. He said a lot of couples get into this really negative place where any positive that comes in, I see it through the lens of all your negative. Oh, well, that's just you being nice because you want something. Or when a negative comes in, well, see, that's how you always are. That's when a couple is in a negative sentiment. That's all they think about each other. And the positive has been lost. The remembering who you were outside of that has been lost. And we're going to talk about that because that's the importance of loving on the offensive and protecting the friendship. Nick, did you want to go into forgiveness and being able to forgive quickly?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I would add to Roxanne is that if we know that the very first church is our family, first thing that God does in the book of Genesis is create a family. So God from the very beginning chose the importance of a family. He wanted us to have family. Friends, siblings, all of that he yearns for us to have. And we have to know that if you study the Old Testament, why did Lucifer, what was the fault? Why is there a devil that we call the Diabolos, the devil today? And it is because he was the antithesis of relationships. The devil hates relationships, and he does everything that he can to destroy them. I think of it like this story that I would like to share with you. Think of this mom that's at home. She's got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-month-old, and she's got the 1 month on her hip, and she's got the 4-year-old playing with toys. She's got the TV on in the house. Husband's not home. She's got the washing machine going. She's trying to cook. Some of you moms and dads, maybe you can relate to this, but she's got the baby on the hip. The 4-year-old's got toys and he's playing around. She's falling over those toys. The TV's loud. Everything is loud, and there's a knock at the door. Okay? And she's like trying to manage all these things, but there's that knock at the door keeps knocking, and she's almost to the point where, okay, I'm going to cut just a minute, and the knock keeps getting louder and louder every time, and she's like, okay, I'm going to get to it. She's trying to hold this baby, and she's taking the baby there, and she eventually gets to the front door. She opens the front door, and as she opens the front door, there's this man that starts putting his finger in this mom's face and he's a debt collector, and he's going, you owe me money, you're past due, and all these negative things. He starts saying, you've been not paying for all these months, you should have been paying all these bills, you owe us, and if you don't start paying us, we're going to take over your house. And the lady is obviously holding the 1 month, the 4-year-old's there, the 2-year-old is like standing up, wobbling around, the food's going on in the kitchen, the washing machine's going, everything is just a busy life. And she's like, what is the address that you're looking for, that you're going to? And so he gives her the address. And he's like, and he goes again on her. You did this. You owe us this money. We're a debt collector, and you didn't pay all this. And so she says, she looks over at him and she says, lean in for a moment. And the guy's like, okay. He leans into her a little bit. He says, no, she says, lean into me a little bit more. And he's like cautious, but leans into her a little more. He says, no, lean into me more. And the man leans into her a little more, and she says, you have the wrong address, and slams the door on the man. And I think in many ways, can I tell you something? In your life, we're so busy. We are managing the baby on the hip. We're managing the kids. We're managing our work, being a grandparent, being a spouse, being a child. We're managing so much. And every day, there's a knock at the door. And what he wants to do is to say, you're not good. Get you to take over the house. You're lacking. And what we have to constantly remind ourselves is that we believe and we are married to an amazing, amazing father, husband. His name is Jesus Christ, who paid all of our debts. We don't owe anything. That he stepped into the courtroom of your life and of my life and said, you want to talk about family? I'm loving you first. Like, God didn't say, come on, Akron, Ohio, a little bit more, pray to me a little more, then I'm going to come and show you love. Come on, you can do it. No. God said, I'm coming to you, for God so loved this world that he didn't wait for us to connect to him. He came to this earth and died for it to show us what fighting nicely, what a relationship should look like. And so one of the things that we encourage as we're talking about this is being aware that the devil is there to steal, kill, and destroy, knock at the door of our families, of our relationships. So how do we shut the door on him besides what we've been talking about? How we would add that you look for the good in others. Remember me telling you this. For every one negative statement that you make, it takes 23 positive statements to get you back to where you were before you made that negative statement. So you know how the old adage in the scriptures, it talks, the book of Solomon, God calls Solomon the wisest man who ever lived. He writes the book of Proverbs, generally believed to be the author of the book of Proverbs. And he talks about how the power of our words, that our words should be like life-giving water. It should give life to people. And so when we think before we speak that the words that we're sharing should be life-giving. And it takes 23 positive words for that every one negative word that we might say. So we would say, one other thing that we would tell you to do, besides what we've already mentioned, is the idea of looking for the good of others. We're not perfect. If you think that you're perfect, or if I think that I'm perfect, this may not be the retreat for you. I know y'all came for a word of encouragement today, but I'm telling you with an encouraging voice, we're not perfect. And so with the same level of mercy you show people, is the same amount of mercy God shows you. In the New Testament, only one time do we ever see God running. It's in the story of the prodigal son. You heard it a couple of weeks back. It's the only time in the entire, one could argue in the entire Bible, that you ever see God running. What happens? The son goes off and does awful things. In many ways, we do that all the time. We kind of leave God at times. We kind of connect in and out with him. And in a summation, what happens that I want to share with you is that when he came to his senses, the prodigal son never even gets to his father because the father is already running to his son. In other words, the moment that he just said, I need to go back, God's running. And in the Jewish custom, to have someone running is megale dropi. It's a major shame. For someone's robe, men wore robes back in those days, for them to show any parts of their feet or their leg was considered to be almost a act of disrespect or almost not being culturally aware. So when the Bible, and nothing in the Bible, by the way, is nuanced. There is a specific purpose for the lines that are said. So when it says that he is running to him, the point being is that his robe is, he is so much in love with us that he is running to save us. So much so that he'll break every rule to get to us. So if he shows us mercy, and he's running to us, therefore we should be the same way with others. We are called to love, to forgive quickly, and to look for the good in others. And one of the things we oftentimes tell people is in the Lord's Prayer, we talked about that earlier, is the only promise that God gives us, and there are thousands of promises that Jesus makes to us in the Old and the New Testament. Only one promise is made conditionally, and that is the promise to forgive you. Because God says, if you do not forgive people, neither will I forgive you. It is a conditional, like God will not act until you act. Imagine how much freedom God is giving us when he says that. Like if you don't do it, I heard an African-American pastor put it this way. Pardon the expression, but this is just, I love it. It still sticks with me. He says, if you do, he do. If you don't, he don't. And so my message to you is it sticks, but the idea that we are called to forgive. And I will tell you, it is not easy to forgive. And the notion that, we are forgiving, that's why the Lord's Prayer, and oftentimes it's called the daily prayer. Because forgiveness is a daily decision you have to make. It's not easy. And in fact, that door that knocks at that person, the door that knocks oftentimes is the devil saying, don't forgive. Hold on to anger. Hold on to resentment. So the challenge that you have is, some people say to me, Father Nick, I forgive him, but I can't forget. It's still on my mind. I remember what that person did. And I get it. I totally get it. That's why it's a daily act that you have to do. That 5 minutes of prayer in the morning, God, I'm coming to you because I know today I'm going to see that person like it's under my skin. And I'm just asking you, God, help me to forgive that person. Help me, Lord, to deal with that person. It's so important. We could spend a whole retreat on forgiveness alone, but I wanted to kind of make sure that we were covering quite nicely because I know we got two other areas that we've got to cover.
The piece with forgiveness one of the strongest ways that I feel is a variable in forgiveness is looking at people's vulnerability and why they acted the way they did. I'm going to say that again. Looking at somebody's vulnerabilities, what their weaknesses are, as to why they acted the way they did. When someone snaps at me, like even at the grocery or we were driving to the airport and, some guy made some hand gestures to us, just angry people. My first thought is he does not have the skills to know how to navigate that moment. He does not know how to handle his own anger. There's a vulnerability there. When someone's really grumpy, I think maybe they didn't eat, this afternoon, or maybe they've got a lot on their plate. We have to look at people's errors in the greater context of people's weaknesses. We all have weaknesses. We all have struggles. We all have skills and tools that we're not good at. So when you're trying to forgive someone, you really try to have that sense of, no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. This is a vulnerability. This is a weakness. Let me love him through it, because maybe I'm going to end up being able to teach them that through my love, through my kindness. And when you end up fighting about a lot of things, one of the things I always say is, look at the values underneath what you're fighting about. Because if we're trying to have a God-first relationship, there are certain values we want in place. I remember when I first met Nick, one of the reasons I was so moved by him, it was, he reminded me so much of my dad. Values that I was raised with in my own family of origin. He valued the faith, and he valued the family. And that reminded me so much of my dad. And so I think we have to look at, when we look at what we end up fighting, recurring themes over and over again in relationships, there's usually a value that's compromised. Maybe he's not valuing family the way I do. We're not both valuing our faith. Maybe we don't have integrity and honesty as part of our relationship. Maybe we struggle with humility. Those values that Christ talks about are often what end up compromising a relationship. So if you find yourself in a recurring frustration in a relationship, think about what value might be missing here. What value might be missing. I had a relationship, a wife I was talking to the other day, and she was coming in because her husband of 20-some years was unfaithful. And he'd entered this sort of texting relationship in a very inappropriate sense. And we were trying to sort of understand how this came to be. A Christ-loving family, how did this happen? And after lots of time, we realized they weren't on the same page with their value system. The family and the faith were not on his radar. They were on hers, but they weren't on his. His sense of family, he was more in his own self. And he had sort of forgotten to put his family and his faith on the radar. They weren't going to church, they weren't involved in any church, and they weren't praying together. And there was a lot of him versus them. And so accidentally, he ends up in this situation. And I call that the accidental affair. These aren't people who seek these things out, but they fall into it because their values weren't talked about. So I strongly encourage you guys to think about the values that you have that define your relationship. So we're going to move into love offensively, unless you have anything else.
No, let's go. I know that you guys it's after lunch, and it's one of those times where, well, it just gets to be a little bit tiring, and I totally understand. We're going to hit to love offensively. We believe that the most successful relationships, any relationships that you're in, are the most proactive or offensively minded relationships. With your children, with your spouse, with whoever it is, co-workers, the most successful ones are offensively minded. And so often you can hear people say, Father, the passion has run out in our relationship. Or, back in the days, those were the good old days. What you're talking about is what you young people talk about all the time. You don't know how it is to be at that level. And I always tell people, your relationships are like a fireplace, all right? The fireplace is where that relationship takes place. But someone's got to be able to go outside and put a piece of wood on the fire. You got to be the one in a relationship, whatever that relationship is with, or whomever it is with. In a relationship, someone has to constantly be putting fires there. It gets cold. Our coldest day of the year would be today for you guys in Jacksonville, right? It never gets cold like this. So everybody in Florida right now, if this was our day in Jacksonville, would have their fireplace going. Temperature at 78 degrees, and we would be good. And we would all snuggle around our little gas fireplace that gives off probably very little heat, but we would just do it, just so we can feel like what you guys feel about for 4 months. And we always, Roxanne and I are big snugglers. We have to cuddle with each other. And in our fireplace, at some point, if we're out there just looking at the fire, eventually that fire is going to go out. That's how our relationships are. Someone's got to be able to be humble enough to go outside, clean off the dirty wood, and say, here, another piece of wood is going to go on this, another log on the fire. And so what we want to do is give you some tools that you can love offensively. And just think about it. How many of you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you think that you can have a better relationship with your children? How many of you can have a better relationship with a spouse? Or a sister-in-law, or maybe even your own sister or brother. Every one of us at some point can feel like I don't want to show my hands, but I could raise my hand to that. But I want to love better offensively. And so let's give you some practical tools to how we can love offensively.
I remember when my dad was near the end of his life, I started asking him. There was this fear, like, I'm never going to be able to ask him another question. So I want to know everything about who he is, what he did, what he feels. And I started asking all of these questions. And I remember writing down the answers because I just wanted to know every facet of who he was. And I think in my own life, and I was able to I think, write a beautiful speech at his eulogy that really encompassed who he was and taught people about who he was. But I thought, why did I wait till then to ask him all these questions? Why was I not more curious about who he was and how he came to be earlier in his life? All those years and times I spent with him. And I think in our own marriages or in our own relationships, they get quite stale because we stop asking questions. We stop being curious about who our partners are. But guess what? The person you married 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's not the same person. They have grown, they have changed, they have new insights, they have new ways of doing things. They've learned things about themselves. But the number one collateral damage of an older relationship is the lack of curiosity in one another. And I strongly, strongly encourage you, if you want to love offensively, rediscover your partner. Be curious about them. Ask them questions. Here's some fun things. I have a list of questions that I always like to ask people when they come in. What's the best compliment you ever received and why? That tells me something about what does that mean to that person? And everyone tells me something totally different. I ask them, if you could be anybody else in this world for 24 hours, who would you pick and why? Again, I learned something about that person. What was the worst insult you ever received that you can never forget? Again, tells me something about what meant something to them. What was their best childhood experience, most embarrassing moment? What's the biggest thing you've learned about yourself in the last 10 years? How are you different now than you were when I first met you? Here's another one I like to ask. What relationship do you look up to and why? Why am I asking all this? Because I'm getting to discover something about this person that I did not know before. And it's in an indirect way because I'm not asking it in relation to me, right? Because people have a harder time accessing those sorts of things. If I ask someone directly, hey, what do you value? I don't know. But when you ask these questions, you circle back and you learn something new. So never stop being curious. Never stop asking what their dreams are for their life. What keeps your partner awake at night? Do you know? What are they worried about? Why? These are the types of conversations we don't have. We talk a lot about what we have to get done, what's coming up next weekend, but we don't often sit down with each other in a very connected and invested way where all I want to do is learn about your soul and how it's changing. And it changes every year, every week, every decade. I can tell you I'm a very different person now than when we first met. I've grown, he's grown. And so it's so important that we are continuing to be curious about that, because otherwise we will have the couple who comes in after 35 years say, well, we're just not in love anymore. But when was the last time you had a conversation like that? Do you even know your partner anymore? And these are great questions, by the way, to ask your kids, your grandkids, your sister, brother, your mother, your father. Don't wait until somebody is on their deathbed to ask these questions and to be curious in the relationship. Spend time together. One of the things that I think people don't do is they don't protect these routine ways of relating with each other. I always ask people, well, how do you guys go to bed at night? What's your evening routine? Well, he's on one couch, I'm another. Whenever we get tired, we go to bed. Okay, well, does that work for you? Does he like that? Do you like that? Well, we never thought about it. Do you want to go to bed at the same time? Well, I don't know. These are things people are not talking about. Hey, how do you spend your weekends? Well, whatever comes up. Okay, well, what would he like to do? What would he like to do if he could have any weekend in the world? What would he choose to do? What about you? How would you ideally want to spend downtime? I hear things all the time like, well, he likes to be so busy, but I'd rather just relax. Well, have you ever had that conversation? No. Instead, we're just resentful and digging in our heels about having to go to the next event that she didn't really want to go to, and they're fighting and bickering, but they don't know why. Okay? How do you want to spend vacations? How do you want to spend holidays? Ask in your relationships these questions. Even if you've been married for 20, 30, 40 years, you may have never had these conversations. But it's enlightening, and it's very enlightening to have these conversations when you're not in the midst of a fight about it. Well, I don't really like to go to your mother's on Christmas. Okay, well, that's not a good time to talk about it. Because we're going to my mother's on Christmas. We have to talk about those things in advance. Because then I learn, what do you value about the holidays? What's important to you? Oh, because this is important to me, and now we can come up with something that works for us, where our values are present. I want to be able to see both identities in the way we spend a holiday. But if I don't know your identity, and I don't know what you value, then I'm just going to go to my mom's house for Christmas, because that's what I've done for 30 years. Okay? So these are the types of questions we have to ask ourselves. And one thing I would say, people have date nights, people have all sorts of regular ways that they see each other, but they don't even talk about, say, how do you want to be greeted when you first come home after a work day? Have you ever talked about that? I had a wife tell me the other day, it is so bothersome. They've been married for 13 years. He comes home and he doesn't even come over and give me a hug. He's been doing it for 13 years. I said, oh my gosh, what an easy fix. Just tell him. I said, have you ever talked about it? No. He just goes to his room and then comes out. So these are small things. How do you want to be greeted after a long day? Protected, ritualistic ways of spending time with each other. How do you want to spend evenings? Do you want to sit on the same couch or not? Do you want to watch TV programs together or do you not? We have a hard time finding TV programs, period, because everything's so dark. I was talking to you about this. Everything's so dark on TV, but we've discovered a couple things that we love to watch together. But at other times, he's watching sports and I'm reading, and it's okay. But we've talked about, and we have protected time that we see each other. Hands down in our house, our kids know that Saturday morning is our time. That is our time where we are on the back patio, having our coffee and discussing, just talking, just existing and being without any distraction. And although, yes, they want to spend time with us, yes, they want to talk to us, yes, they want to be part of it, we don't allow it because we need that time with ourselves, but we can depend on it. No matter how busy our weeks are, no matter what's going on, I know that Saturday morning I'm going to have time with him when he's not busy and when I'm not busy, and we can talk about the real things. There may be nothing going on. Sometimes we just sit in silence, but that's okay too, because we're present and our souls are connected.
I was just going to say, we'll just take a little bit of a break. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. If you have any questions about what we've kind of talked about, because I know it's a lot of material and it's kind of like being on the end of a fire hose trying to soak up all this stuff. It's a lot coming at you at one time. But I mean, if you have any questions, or we'll just continue to keep going on.
Do you not focus on feeling?
Oh, in that downtime,
No,
In general?
Yeah, in general.
But the problem with feelings is feelings flee. So you have to be very cautious that your feelings don't lead you, but God leads you. Because your feelings, I'm sorry, is that getting to what you're saying? Okay.
No. Will you ever have a conflict?
Oh.
When, years ago when we had marriage encounter, most important thing was to make your spouse understand your feeling about something that you have a discrepancy on.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard feeling to some degree, but not as much as I would think.
I think that the key, you can go if you want to.
yeah, I mean, feelings are very important. The whole idea in listening well is looking to try to understand them better. And what you're trying to understand is the feeling.
Right.
But attached to that is why they felt that, because there's a request underneath that. You know, if I'm resentful, if I'm that wife and he's coming home and he's not acknowledging me, yes, I'm going to understand what she felt, which was alone. And I can understand how that would feel that way, and she was resentful. But what did she need? So attach that understanding, that next level, once you understand someone's feelings and communicate that, is finding out what the need is. Because otherwise it will continue to recur. But yes, understanding and chasing that emotion and trying to let them know you understand it, you get it, that is about understanding the feeling. Mm-hmm.
And
good question.
And if you're on the end of wanting to communicate how you feel, it's the I'm feeling this, you know, communicating all that as well. So I think, you know, I don't know if you need to do these or you can.
Just for taking these.
Okay. Well, I think, you know, one of the things that as we're talking about this love offensively, one of the things that I think that we try to share a lot with is that in relationships, either they're growing or they're dying. There's no neutral in a relationship. And the ones that are neutral, I would say, are dying. So setting aside that time where you are loving offensively, whether it be a date night, whether it be one of the things that we do almost every week, we try to do this, is I'm constantly asking Roxanne, but you could apply this to a friend or to a sibling. What can I do to love you better? What can I do for my child? And if you have an adult child, maybe the question is what can I do for you? Or what's going on in your mind? And I will tell you that sometimes I have a mom, both of our parents obviously are widows, and so there's a reservation to tell my mom what I need because she's already got her hands full with her own emotions, her own health. And so sometimes your children may not want to communicate with you because they don't want to burden you with that, with those concerns. But that's where you kind of come in and say, in those questions that Roxanne was sharing, is, tell me about, what's like your day like? Tell me about how you go through your day. Oh, Mom, I don't have time to go through that. No, I'm really interested in that. I want to kind of know how your day is, because it's the level of that interest that takes part. So asking that person, what can I do to love you better, is so important. I think we talked about date nights. In our house, I will tell you that wedding rehearsals, we don't go to. My community knows that. They love, because of this. Because I'm a firm believer that if I don't make time for my wife, the devil will make time for my wife. If I don't make time for my family, the devil will make time for my family. And so I have to protect that time. So everyone knows in our church, and on Friday nights, it's Father Nick's night. I'll do the rehearsal, but on the rehearsal dinner, that's time that we do oftentimes our date night. We call it in our house Fun Fridays, because our kids are all hanging out, and we oftentimes watch a movie together. But be protective of your first church, because that's the church that God yearns for us to bring back, back to Him. So I don't know. I didn't want to keep on going. I was going to shift to the next, the final topic, just to kind of.
Just last but not least, I'd say is protect your relationship against stress. Stress is a major factor in this day and age, as you talked about earlier, Nick, and it really seeps into relationships in a very negative way. And what I've found is that people get so tired and so overwhelmed that they begin to be irritable. And then once they're irritable, there's this kind of bickering and disconnection that then takes place in the relationship. And then there's the everything I don't like about him, everything that he's doing wrong, and then I hear this bit. Okay, but where did it ultimately start? Was she happy in herself before all of that? Is she getting her own needs met? And let me tell you, most of the time, no. Most of the time, we haven't really thought about what's going to make us happy. And a lot of times, we're putting a lot of pressure on our partner to fix something that only we can fix ourselves. I find that when people want to figure out what's wrong, they go in, and then when they want to fix it, they go out. It's someone else's fault, and they need to be doing something to make me better. Like, okay, but what are you also doing for yourself in light of that? Because you have ownership in chasing your joy just as much as your partner has ownership in helping you with your joy. So before you're asking of someone else, I really encourage you, take a step back and take a look at what you're doing to manage your own stress, to seek joy in your own life. And are you happy? Are your needs met at the end of the day? And if not, it's something we need to talk about and to seek. And I think if your partner is experiencing stress, one of the biggest problems I've seen is this husband came home and he was saying, I got reamed at work today. And the wife's like, why? For being late. And the wife's like, well, you're always late, so, I don't know what to tell you. That's something you need to work on. Well, what do you think happened to this husband when he's trying to explain himself? Do you think he wanted to go further? No. Because who did she align with? The enemy. The enemy. And when our partner is in stress, you never, ever, ever do this. You never align with the enemy. I don't care what they're talking about. I don't care if the boss was 100% right. You never align with the enemy. This is where feelings come in. You align with and support your partner on how that felt. Okay? So I'm going to lean into supporting you on, man, that must have been so embarrassing. That had to have been hard. I'm so sorry you experienced that. I'm not talking about what he got in trouble for. I'm aligning with how he felt. And that is so, I can't tell you, I can't say that enough, because I see that all the time. And your partner is supposed to be the person you can tell anything to. They're supposed to be your best friend, that person who's going to support you no matter what. And if all I hear from you is more criticism, guess where I'm going? I'm going to seek out that friend over here that I feel some level of connection will support me. And that's how we disconnect. Okay, so no matter what, in times of stress, support and align with your partner. Ask them questions about what that was like. Ask them how it felt. Just ask questions, show understanding, and try to align in some way with supporting them. Because believe it or not, your partner will deflate, kind of come down, and then you have the connection there to recharge, okay? Because stress is huge in relationships, and it does destroy quite a few relationships. So we're going to move into seeking God collectively, and that's our third.
Yeah, our third and final thing. And just a real quick thing that we oftentimes use a lot in leadership training, and is that always go into a problem asking a question. Always go into a problem asking a question. Don't become accusatory. Just go in there. Tell me what's going on. Let me kind of understand your thoughts. So really, obviously, in order, we would have put number 3 first, because we believe that ultimately we have to seek God first. And a lot of what we're talking about are things that we have shared with you already in the previous session. But a couple of things that I think can help all of us is, number 1, if we're going to seek God collectively, pray together. Listen to me now. These are not my words. These are God's words. A family that prays together, you finish it, stays together. Okay, so we have to pray together. Now, I would love to tell you that there's a uniform way of doing it. There's not. For us in our house, obviously at our meals, we pray. We obviously take time in the evenings to say our prayers. And as we talked about earlier, that prayer should be from the heart, not from the mouth. That it should come from our heart in the way in which we express. But there's nothing that moves me more than when Roxanne says, Nick, I'm praying for you. If I told you I'm praying for you, there's a sense of comfort that comes to you. Imagine what that can be when you on the offensively do that to your spouse. The power of the human touch to say, let's pray about it. Well, what are you doing? We've never done that before. What's going on here? No, we're going to pray together. The Bible says, you'll finish this line, when 2 or more are gathered in my name, I am there. God, you're here with us. So pray together. And it's extraordinary how that works in my life. Because we are constantly trying to manage this maze of this world, that we need people to know that, hey, I'm thinking about you, and not only am I thinking about you, I'm praying for you. The number 2 thing I would tell you that I think is so important is that we discuss the Bible and the church together. I oftentimes tell people that sometimes we can spend time, you guys can't relate to this, but some others may. We can spend more time talking about what's going on at church than what we are called to be by the church. You get what I'm saying? Isn't it great when you can say, you know, I heard Father Jerry mentioning this Bible verse today. Let's open up our Bibles. Let's talk about that. Or, you know, I was reading something recently and it really spoke to me this way. In our house, we're constantly asking our children. I oftentimes will ask George. We have 2 children, George and Gabriella, 10 and 8 years old, and I'll say, George, what do you think about today's Bible message? What are your thoughts about that? Just to have them engage in the conversation about talking about the Bible and talking about the church. And I want to encourage you that, that conversation, those insights from your kids, from your family members, are so powerful in your own walk of faith. So discuss the Bible, discuss the church. Bring the Bible into it. In the Old Testament, the book of Deuteronomy, it commands the parents. It commands them. It says, and I'll read you what it says. These commandments, we oftentimes think there are 10 commandments. How many of you think there's 10 commandments? There ain't 10 commandments. There's about 630 commandments, by the way. So put those on a billboard sometimes outside of a courthouse. And you can... But this is what it says, okay? These commandments, this is God saying this. These commandments I give to you today are to be upon your hearts. Listen to what he commands the people to impress them. In the Hebrew language, it is almost like iron them into your children's hearts. And then it's beautiful how God says, God questions himself. He says, how? Just talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 6 to 7. Like God yearns for us to have these, to iron them into our hearts. So we're constantly talking about them. Number 3, in loving God collectively, after we've talked about discussing the Bible and church together, that we're not just simply talking about what's going on at church, but what God, the church, is calling us to be, is number 3, is attend church together. Some of you might say, well, Father Nick, we're already here. We're at church every Sunday. And I get all that, but I don't want you just to attend church. I want you to faithfully attend church. In other words, that I want you to make it a priority that every Sunday is the Sabbath. And that is one of the commandments, that I, God, am putting you first. I had a parishioner of ours recently. I hadn't seen them in a while, and they came to church, and she was like, Father, I love her to death, she's an angel, but she's like, Father, I was thinking about not coming to church today because I was really tired, and I said all these things on my mind, but gosh, as she was getting the idea at the Holy Bread as she was leaving, and she goes, but man, thank you. I'm just so glad I came to church. And I looked at her, and we'll just say that her name is Fotini, but that's not her real name, but we'll just say it's Fotini, and I looked at her, and I said this in the most respectful way to her. I said, and Fotini, where else would you be? Like everything else doesn't matter. And the Bible says that God yearns for his house to be full every single Sunday. And it baffles me sometimes when I hear people say, well, I can pray at home. I can pray by myself. This is your answer to them. In the book of Ephesians, again, another great book to read. We read it at your wedding services when you got married, or it's a beautiful service. It talks about Jesus, and it says that Jesus died on the cross to do what? Pay for our sins. We all know that. But do you know what the number 2 thing is? To establish a church. Like Jesus didn't say to so-and-so, hierarchs, priests, convict them to come to church. You're not coming for the priest. You're coming because God came and spilt his blood. It says, drink of this, all of you. This is my blood, which has been what? Shed. Not poured, shed. And the Bible talks about Jesus being slaughtered. So when we talk about the importance of being at church, you're not coming, you can't do that at home. Yes, there's a point in which you can pray. Yes, God wants you to pray for him at all times. But he died on the cross to pay for your sins and for you to come to church. That's not my words. Those are his words, spoken through St. Paul. So believe me when I tell you, a family that goes to church together, stays together. And I oftentimes tell people this, and is staying at home parents don't raise going to church kids. So you may force them now, but later on you run the risk of that not happening. I don't know, how much time do we have left? Are we kind of closing it up?
About half an hour, Father.
Another hour? Oh, half an hour. So before, we're almost done ourselves, so we may not even go the half an hour. But so the idea is that we attend church together. Staying at home parents don't raise going to church kids. And before we kind of end this, I want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. Yeah.
How do you guys deal with grudges
Oh,
between you two and your relationship? I mean, or just like some examples on like things you can do to cope with them, because everybody has them, so there's no judgment on it. Just what coping mechanisms do you have to keep your relationship together?
And when you say grudges, do you mean things that we just have never been able to let go of, or things that aren't resolved?
Yeah.
Like the coffee cup.
The coffee cup, great example.
Yeah.
And the cabinet.
Plastic cups now that I can just simply throw away.
You know what happens now? I just go and shut the cabinet. And I just go and replenish the cup, right? So what am I doing? There are what I define as, in any relationship, you have problems fall into two categories: solvable and not solvable. And many relationships have unresolvable differences. And those are oftentimes the issues that we just will never solve. Family of origin differences, personality differences, they are issues that don't really have an easy solution. They're something we have to then just adjust ourselves to. And so to answer your question, differences like that, you learn to do what I call the dance. It's back and forth, give and take. Do what's going to make me happy. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for that happiness. I can ask him all I want to close cabinets and put cups away, but inevitably, I'm responsible for my own happiness. So the dance is that you recognize that as an unsolvable, and you do what's going to make you happy and take responsibility for it, because that's what's called making room for each other's differences. There are many, 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 many issues that every marriage has, usually about, I'd say, between 3 and 5 unsolvable problems. And so if we don't learn to dance the dance with the unsolvables, it destroys the marriage.
I'll end with this illustration, and then you guys can continue to ask questions afterwards. So this past week, the last couple of weeks, as we've begun this season of Great Lent, naturally, our eyes are focused on Pascha and on Easter. But you can't have a resurrection without the crucifixion. You can't get to Easter if you don't first get to the cross. And I was thinking for a moment, and sometimes we hear the life of Christ on the cross, and we kind of get this understanding of it, and we hear it a lot that, we're at a soccer game, or we're at a football game, where we see people holding up the John 3:16 sign that says, "For God so loved this world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever should believe in him should not perish, should not die, but will have eternal life." And I was just thinking this past week about all that Jesus has done for me personally, and I hope that it maybe speaks to you. I was thinking about all the things that I've done in my life, things that I've done, sins that I've committed, behaviors that I've done, thoughts that I've had, things that from my childhood to my now as a priest. And I was just thinking about Jesus on this cross. And if you know the story of how Jesus was on the cross, you have to know that God chose to have his Son come at one of the most cruel and brutal times in human history. Because the cross was never meant to be a quick death, it was meant to be a slow death. That the cross was not a very nice, smooth piece of wood, that it was filled with splinters purposefully. That the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament says that he was beaten beyond recognition. We oftentimes see pictures and icons of Jesus, and he looks pretty much like you can recognize him. But the Bible says that his beard was literally ripped out of his face, that he was beaten beyond recognition, that he had almost no back. The crown of thorns, if any of you have ever been overseas, especially in the Holy Land, there is a vine that is known as being the area that has these, the crown of thorns. It's not this nice little crown of thorns with little rose petal thorns. It is about a 4-inch thorn. its intent was to create such a tremendous pain in the head that people will oftentimes die simply from the blood rushing into the head. When you think about the nails were roughly about 6 inches long that would go into Christ's wrist and in his legs. The cross was not meant to be, you would not die from the nails or the crown of thorns. The Romans were perfectionists at subtle suffering. And they would have this idea that when you were on the cross that you would die from, not from the wounds, but from asphyxiation, you would literally be unable to breathe. That's why there is a step under his feet, so that every time when the compression of the ribs would happen, that it would literally stop the heart from beating, and you would be forced to, with the nails in your hands, with the nails in your feet, to lift up. That when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the Bible says that he was sweating drops of blood, that the physicians that are here will tell you that for the body to sweat drops of blood, it believes that the body was under the most unbearable stress that one could endure. And so sometimes as Christians, especially as Orthodox Christians, we herald ourselves, and as we should, as we are the church of the resurrection. But I believe that sometimes we kind of glance over Holy Thursday because that's a long day of a lot of gospel readings, and God knows on Friday we're all there, but we're kind of so busy doing the things in the church that sometimes we glance over the crucifixion to get to the resurrection. And I would argue that as people of faith, that maybe we need to spend more time in the crucifixion. Because the Bible says that when Christ came, he didn't wait for us to be good. The Bible says that the wages of your sin and my sin is, do y'all know the answer? Death. In the Old Testament, when you died, if you ask a Jewish person today, what happens when you die? It's the Jews that practice the Torah, or the Tanakh, we call it in Hebrew. What is the Old Testament? What happens when you die? Most Jewish scholars will tell you that they don't know what takes place after they die, because the wages of sin is death, period. And so when Jesus introduces this idea that I'm coming, and I'm coming to save my people, that I'm not only going to pay for the sins that you have committed, you're currently committing, or that you will ever commit, that by my stripes you are healed. That what God was saying is, I am dying for you. You ever heard of the cat of 39 tails? 39 tails? They would have these, Romans would have these little chains that would come, and they would be little pieces of glass and broken bones from animals and metal that was meant to just grab and rip. And I share this with you not so that you go, oh my gosh, he's grossing us out. But you can't get to the resurrection if you don't recognize the crucifixion. You can't experience freedom if you don't realize that you were once in bondage. That you were once a slave to the sin. And so getting back onto my story, I was thinking about my own life. And I'm thinking, Jesus is on this cross for me, for you. And I'm thinking all the things that I've done and I was thinking that which God, like when we say, great are you, O Lord, and wondrous are your works, and there's no words that can sing of your wonders. We sing that in baptism. Or that when we say, Dis Theos Megas, who is so great a God as our God, the God who works wonders? That which God in any religion do you find that stepped into the courtroom of my life and your life and said, when God was going to say the judgment is death, that when Jesus said, no, before you set that judgment seat of death, I'm willing to step in for them. I'll carry their sins. And I think that when we were drowning in the sin of our life, that God gave us a lifesaver. Him. That Jesus Christ is the lifesaver. And what he yearns for me and for you to do, that as we journey in life, as we journey through this season of Great Lent, that we don't just have a cognitive understanding of what Jesus did, but we experience that. God, you saved me. That if I've lost my husband, I've lost my wife, I've lost my child, I've lost my siblings, like because of your lifesaver, they live forever. That because of what you did for me, I have the promise of eternal life. And today when you leave here, I want to give you this lifesaver. And I want you to simply keep it. Don't open it. Don't do anything with it. Just keep it in your purse. Keep it in your wallet. Keep it on your nightstand. But every time you see this lifesaver, you think about you. And you think, God, I need to connect to you first. Like, God, let me seek you first. And then when I connect to him, then I can better connect to them. And so I want you to take another lifesaver. And this lifesaver is for the people that you have in your life. This is the part 2 of our session. That you take this and you look to better your relationship with your husband, your wife, your child, your friend. You say, God, you saved me, let me go save someone else. And you make it a point that when you travel in this life, that when you get to that Pascha and you're like, Christos anesti, Christos voskresti, Messiah come, Christ is risen, that when you say that, you're like, God, you did this for me. You came down to me like the cross, and I'm called to go out to all the people. Let me be a lifesaver that helps to change this world. God bless all of you. Wish you God's strength in your walk of faith. We love you. We encourage you to please, if you found this helpful, you can stay connected to us. We'd love to stay connected to you. If you haven't filled out the information that are on there, there's an opportunity to fill out that sheet that says your name, phone number, email address. Do that. Listen to our show if you find it beneficial. But please, as you're leaving, I'm going to ask my sweet Nancy to go and just kind of give every one of you 2 lifesavers. And I'll open up for questions. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you.
I was born and raised Orthodox, cradle to grave. I married Protestant. My children were raised Protestant. They go to church today. When my wife was alive, sometimes I go to Orthodox church, sometimes I go to Methodist church. Sometimes I went by myself, sometimes I went with my daughters and my wife. Any comments?
I'm sorry, so the question is?
Sometimes I was in church by myself, sometimes I was in church with my wife and my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and they were not any comments.
Well, I mean, I think the challenge, I think the thing that you're doing to kind of give you just a little bit of an encouragement is that the question is that he's going to church, that sometimes his children were with him, sometimes they weren't, but you were going. And this is something that you hear a lot of times, especially in our church, where in most churches in this area where you have roughly the age of 18 to 35 represent the groups of people that most often, or the demographics of people that most often leave the church. So what I would say to you is on your side is that you're going and you're being in an environment that God wants for you to be in. In other words, God wants you to be in His house. And if in our, let me put it to you this way. At the end of the day, as Roxanne was saying earlier, you stand before Christ. You're walking with Him. And there are things that you're teaching your children, verbally and non-verbally, about what you value. But you're also you're also allowing the opportunity that on that Sunday, maybe God speaks to you in a way that He hadn't spoken to you, or maybe you get something out of the service that maybe you didn't before. So I would encourage you to continue to do that. And those of you that might be concerned about your children who may or may not be engaged in the church, we could talk about that obviously, in another setting. But what I have found is you do your best to be yourself, to be your best self, as Roxanne was saying. and let God do the rest. There's an old saying, you try your best, let God do the rest. And so you're leaving it up to Him. Say, God, you love these children more than I love these children, because you died on the cross for them. So let me just kind of that becomes one of the prayers that I do during my day. But you keep running your race, irrespective of whether or not they keep coming to church or not. Questions? Anyone else have any?
Not for personal reasons, for other things, for our church and the people that we, of course, worship with. From the morning session when you did the tea example, right? So what have you found that people that have gone from being Sunday dippers to people who truly live the rule of 15? What's been the reason for that? If people come back to you later, or people that, what has been that
So the question that he's asking is what, when people actually put these things basically into practice, what kind of changes have they made in their life? I will tell you that Christianity and retreats are like this, by the way. We run very good sprints, but not good marathons. So you'll leave here and we hope you're leaving here energized and excited. You have some notes that you've probably taken. But you'll run a great sprint, but may not be a good marathon. And so one of the things that I encourage people to, one of the things that when people put this into place is that their life changes. I think that's what's the frustrating part in so many of our world, so much of our society, is that we have this idea that we can do this all on our own. And we can't. We need God involved in our day-to-day life. And so if I'm not making time for Him, the devil will make time for us. C.S. Lewis, have you ever heard of C.S. Lewis? He's a great author. He never became Orthodox, but loved the Orthodox Church. Wrote some great books, Mere Christianity, Screw Tape Letters. You ever get some time to read that? He says that he's magical in the way in which he talks about the devil. And he says that Christians either over-believe in the devil or under-believe in the devil. But the devil yearns more than anything he goes, I don't mind he said that the devil is like one of these people that doesn't mind if you over-believe or under-believe, just don't Bible believe. Just don't Bible believe. So in other words, don't believe in the Bible. And I think so if we know that it takes that connectivity to Christ through prayer, through reading our Bibles, making that time of just being in pause, it changes our life. This changed my life. I'll give you my own personal testimony. Just, when I grew up in the church, we would go Pascha. Lent came and went. We fasted because my mom told me that we were going to fast. I stood up when everyone stood up in our church, and I did my cross when everyone else would. It was like we had the wave before the stadiums had the wave, because when someone did the cross, the Stavro, everyone did their crosses. That's just how. And in our church, we still have the light. I mean, we used to turn on the light. Everybody stands. Sometimes we want to mess with our people. Priests are like this sometimes. And you won't turn on the light, and people are just kind of sitting down. And it's that time when you're like saying to the Creator, we're like, everybody, y'all need to stand up. Y'all need to stand up. But so I never got that. In my year, the year before I would go to the seminary, and I never went to the seminary, I have to tell you, to become a priest. I went to the seminary because I came to know our Orthodox Church, because, I don't know who said it earlier, I had a Baptist friend of mine who invited me to his church. And in the South, the churches there are all mega churches. So First Baptist Church downtown has about 26,000 people that attend that church. And he said, Nick, why don't you come to our church and come to our youth night? And we went there, and anyway, long story short, I was very cocky at that time, very arrogant in the way because I was all Orthodox, but for all the wrong reasons. I didn't even know why I was Orthodox. And long story short, the Baptist pastor said to me, "You're Orthodox?" I said, "Oh yeah, we are the true church." I said, "Oh really?" He goes, "Nick, tell me, why do you have icons?" I'm like 20 years old at this time. "Why do you have icons in your church? What's the history of them?" We just do. Yes, because God said so. I wasn't even that sharp to say that. I was like, we just do. And then there was a question that said, he followed up, he was methodical, he knew what he was doing. He said to me, Nick, tell me, why do you guys have saints? Where is that mentioned in the Bible that you have saints? And I was like, we just do. And I was telling this to the good deacon here yesterday. I was saying, and to Dr. John, I was saying that, you know how sometimes you can say things, and don't take this the wrong way, but you say things, and as you're saying things, you sound ignorant when you're saying them. And so you keep saying it, but you sound more and more ignorant. That's how I felt in that moment. And I just felt just lower and lower. And I never felt more like just empty. Like, why am I investing in a church that I know nothing about? Like, why? And my parents, God love them, were all about us owning that relationship with Christ in a real way. And so that was the genesis of me saying, let me start reading the Bible, and let me start in the moment that I started to read the Bible. And believe me, I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm not better than you. And I want you to hear that. We are all in the same boat. You might respect me because I'm a priest, and I love that, that's fine. But don't respect me because of Nick Louh. You can respect the office of the priesthood. But we're all in the same boat. I say the same prayer that you say every Sunday, that I am the chief sinner. Okay, we're all there. But the more that I read the Bible, and the more that I prayed during that season of Lent before I went to the seminary, I'll never forget that when the priest sang, come let us receive the light, the never-ending, never-fading light of Jesus Christ, come all. I remember that there was a pouring of, I would say, the Holy Spirit on me in ways that I can never experience. And I know that for my life, just like a marriage, if I find that I'm not connecting if I find like my life is kind of getting stale, even as a priest, I'm going back, where's that rule of 15 in my life? Like, priests have to pray too. I mean, where is my connectivity there? So I will tell you that not because I say it works, but because the Bible and God says that it works, is to keep him first. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, seek me first, and I will make all your paths straight. Apart from me, Jesus Christ says this, you can't do anything. I'm the vine dresser, you're just a part of the vine. If you stay connected to me, if you remain in me, I'll take care of you. So that's the challenge that I would encourage you all to do. Sorry, I was... any other comments or... Yes, ma'am.
I have a friend who wanted to share problems with me, and I don't know exactly what to tell her. And she was raised in an Orthodox Christian home, but now she has come to me. I don't know what to say exactly. What prescription can I offer?
So the question was, I have a friend coming to me who's asking me for help, and I don't know what advice to give her. And I think the way we can be a very, very good friend is to just listen. People often, when they're talking out loud about their problems, aren't looking for any solutions. They're just looking for someone to understand them, to listen, to empathize. I want to know that you get what it's like to be in my shoes. That's called empathy. And it's something that I think, we struggle with as a whole, but putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and communicating that you get it. So try to listen for what she's feeling, what she's experiencing, and just let her know you understand. And at the end of the day, you can pray together about it.
Let me add to that. So, real quick, on the cross, Jesus makes 7 statements. The first statement that he makes is on forgiveness. He says, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. So remember, in the context of all that we just mentioned about the crucifixion, the death, the scarring, the ripping out of the beard, all that stuff, we get all that. In the midst of his pain, he still teaches us. We're actually, in Jacksonville, doing a sermon series. We do sermon series in Jacksonville, and so we're doing a sermon series, if you're interested in this, called At the Cross. The second statement that he makes, you can just go to sittingondthedivine.com, you can get all of our sermons on there. But the second statement he says is that, remember that thief who's at the right side. And you remember the story, the thief on the left was like, come on, get us off the cross. You can't do it, you're the Christ. Why can't you do that? And Jesus remained silent. The other thief on the right side says to that thief, he says, this man has done nothing wrong. We have done the things that are wrong, and we are being punished justifiably. But this man is innocent. And then he looks at Jesus. If you could never think of a prayer to say before you take koinonia, before you take communion, say this prayer. Lord, remember me in your kingdom. And the priest, Jesus looks at this man in anguish and in pain that he's going through. And he says to that thief on the right side, he says, assuredly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. So what I would encourage you to tell them is three things. One is encourage them with your words. That goes a lot to what Roxanne was just saying about listening to them. Encourage them. We're just gonna tell you that God says the most often used statements is fear not. We're gonna walk with you on that. Number two is you walk with them. This is where we sometimes struggle, is that we can tell people we love to be Dr. Phil to people. We are good at that. Sometimes we don't even take the same advice to ourselves, which is a whole other story. But the second thing that you would want to do is walk with them. How many of you have lost a loved one that you were very, very close to, maybe a spouse? So like it's great at the funeral service that you have all these people saying, I'm so sorry, I'm praying for you. But after a week, those people aren't always there. And this is where we as Christians, I think, need a lot of work. Walk with them. Jesus says, today you are going to be with me. In other words, I'm taking you with me. I'm going to walk with you step by step. I was telling the good deacon last night or this morning, I can't remember. We had two deacons in our church. One of the deacons, an amazing man, had ALS. And the Lou Gehrig's disease, you all know it, and it was right when the time of the ice bucket challenge was. So we all did, right, we did liturgy, and then in the front of our church, we had, I would say, 400 or 500 people in the front of our church with just tons of buckets of ice water. And we just poured it over us because that was the ice bucket challenge. If you haven't heard about it, you just go online. Most of you know about that. And so what were we doing? Walking with him. I have a friend of mine who has, in his church, they had a men's Bible study. One of the men in the Bible study was recently diagnosed with cancer. What did all the other men in that Bible study do? They shaved their heads because the guy was taking chemo and radiation. What was it? They were walking with him. Sometimes we do great sprints, zoisimas, I'm so sorry for your loss, giving you that encouraging statement, but when you go to number two, we're like, I got my own life. And God yearns for us, like him, in the midst of our pain of our day, to say, baby, I'm going to walk with you. We're going to walk together. And the last thing to do, so you encourage them, you walk with them. Last thing is guide them to Christ. He says, Jesus says this on the cross, today you will be with me where? In paradise. Like, can I tell you something? I want just to give you this encouraging word. Like if we talked about earlier that America, or anywhere in the world, is not our home. Like sometimes we're so good at being like, I am from Greece, I am from the Middle East. That's great, but it ain't your homeland. Your homeland is the kingdom of heaven. And what God was saying is that you're in a win-win situation. Because whether or not God answers your prayers on planet Earth, he does answer your prayers in the kingdom of heaven. And he was telling them, I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to encourage you is what he does first. I'm going to walk with you, and I'm going to tell you that God is still on the throne. No matter how many school shootings, no matter how many terrorist attacks we face, Jesus Christ has a picture of you on his refrigerator. Like he loves you so much that he died for you. And so because of that, the encouragement that we have, that we tell ourselves is, we're in a win-win situation. Like every one of you that lost loved ones, we win. Not because of anything that we did, but because of what he did. That's how we love him so much. So you keep guiding them that, you know what? This situation may not get better. When my dad was battling cancer, my dad and her dad were diagnosed the same exact week of cancer. They were both the picture of perfect health. My dad looked like me. Actually, he probably looked younger than me. Many people would see him and say, that's your brother. The priesthood is a little bit wearing on me a little bit. Her dad the same way. Her dad was a professor of statistics and mathematics at the University of Florida, was ranked 16th in the world in statisticians. Like that, our week went from, and I had just come back from a mission trip to Africa. Came back the same week, my dad had a doctor's appointment. I got back on Sunday. He was diagnosed on Monday. Her dad diagnosed on Thursday of that week. And so I cannot tell you that as a priest and as a presbytera, like we needed the encouraging, the walking through us, with us, and the guiding us. And we had that. And so that's what I would just tell you to share with your friend, is that he's still on the throne. Like my dad, her dad, we love him. I wear his ring every day, but he's with me. I'm in a win-win situation. And that's how I approach that. Anyway, didn't mean to get us all emotional before. Anyway, any other final questions that you guys might have? Well, we love you, and we ask one favor of you, and that is pray for us. Pray for our ministry. Pray for God to continue to work in our life. If you need anything at all, lean on us, lean on people that are in your life. We're just an email away, we're just a Facebook message away, we're just a phone call away. That's the beautiful thing about Orthodoxy is we're all family. I want to thank Presbytera for the foresight and the prophetic work that she's done in establishing the Orthodox Christian women. You guys are amazing. We do speeches all the time, but what you guys are here, God bless you. And thank you all for your hospitality, your love. If you have friends that live in the Salt Lake City area, we'll be there in 2 weeks, and so tell them that if you enjoyed it, to be with us then. God bless you all.